In this episode of the Hill Country Podcast, I visit with the Museum of Western Art director Darrell Beauchamp about our joint love of the music of Michael Martin Murphey, the current exhibit at the museum, and the upcoming 40th anniversary exhibit. I know you'll enjoy this episode of the Hill Country Podcast.
And we're rolling.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and we're going to have a lot of fun today because I have back with me one of my favorite people anyway, Darrell Beauchamp, Executive Director, Western Museum of Art. But we're going to talk about art in a little different direction, perhaps. Darrell, first of all, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
So, Darrell, we're going to celebrate your relationship with one of the great musicians in Texas and in the United States, Michael Martin Murphey. So, could you tell us who he is and what's the story behind you guys working together?
Well, I mean, my relationship with Michael Murphey started back in high school, actually, when I became a big fan of, some of his early work, Geronimo's Cadillac, things like that. And he was doing a concert in Bell County, Texas, right? And then I got wind that he was going to be at a local record shop and he was going to be signing autographs, right? He was going to go by there and sign autographs. So I got in line like a dutiful, fan should do. And I bought and I didn't have the money to buy it, but I bought the Michael Murphey Blue Sky Night Thunder album, which is right there, and had him autograph it back when he was just Michael Murphy, right? I mean, the story would go that later he would go out to Hollywood and want to star in films. And he went to register for SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, and they said, we already have a Michael Murphy. You have to change your name. And he said, well, can I just add my middle name? And that became Michael Martin Murphy. And the 3M logo was born at that point, if you will. But this was a case of, a high school kid who really enjoyed a performer and went and, tracked him down and got an autograph on an album that I still have, 40 some odd years later, And so got on with my life, enjoyed his music like a lot of people, and became a museum director. And throughout my museum career, he has been one that has always kind of favored museums. And he has always been known for doing concerts in smaller towns. Like here in Kerrville, he does the Cowboy Christmas every year. He takes that Cowboy Christmas tour, usually, around the country, and does them in a lot of same places. And oftentimes he visits the same city, every year. It's on a routine for him. And I was the director of a museum in Montana, and we were fortunate enough to host him as a concert, a little mini concert, working with the local symphony is what he usually does. And we hosted a little benefit thing for one of the local charities, and I don't even remember who it was. And I got to meet him and say hi, and that was pretty much the end of it. It was one of those, hey, I've got an autograph record of yours from 1976, oh, hey, that's great, thumbs up kind of a thing. And we forgot all about it. And then I went to Hobbs, New Mexico, and was in Hobbs for 8 years. And he was associated with a ministry out there, out in Lubbock, Texas, a homeless ministry, because Michael lives in New Mexico. And he was associated with this home ministry. And we hosted a concert at our museum to do a benefit, a small concert for 200 people in our theater there at the museum. And so he came on board, and we came early, and we actually set up the equipment, and the roadies got it all ready. And he was doing an acoustic, just him kind of thing. And he hated everything about it. He hated the sound, the way it was sounding. He hated the lighting, the way it was lit. He just didn't like the intimacy of the theater, and he just complained and complained and complained. And I told him, just chill. This was going to be fine. We have good light people, good sound people, and we worked it all out. And he did his little, sound checks, if you will, and got it over there. And then that evening, he did just a bang-up job of a little concert for the people, and it was so well received, and it was so good. And he came up to me later and apologized that he had ridden me so hard that day. And I reminded him, we've met before. We have. I said, yeah, we met. And, when I was a kid in high school, when I was a museum director in Montana, and this is our third meeting, you know. And I've never once asked you for your autograph other than on the record. And I was in a line of people. And he said, well, why don't we just get a picture? Let's get a picture made. And so I thought, well, how's that going to, get me an autograph? But we took the picture, and we took this picture here when I was in Hobbs, New Mexico, of me and Murph standing there. And I handed it to my assistant, and she immediately printed it. Right? I mean, you could do that. That was better than quick photo, And she printed it, and we brought it out to him, and he signed for me the autograph here. For the American West, Michael Martin Murphy, with the little 3M logo there, and that's me about 30 pounds ago. But anyway, that's kind of, we got to know each other, right? That evening between the concert, there was going to be a dinner, there was going to be a gathering, there was going to be an auction, and one of the things they were going to be auctioning off was a Michael Martin Murphy guitar, where he had written the lyrics to Wildfire around the base of the guitar. And the group had hoped to auction the guitar, and get a certain amount of money for it. And it wasn't going well. And so one of my benefactors was sitting there kind of next to me, and she said, well, I'd like one. And I said, run it up, make it happen. And she finally let the lady who ended up buying it have it at a reasonable price. And then she said, but I'll also take one. And she gave a price out there that was, just phenomenal. And of course, Murphy said, I'll do you one. And for making the second one happen and basically tripling the money that they were going to get, his manager, a fellow named Bert Madera, looked over at me and said, and I'll get you one for making that happen. And I thought, no, that's okay. It's not going to happen. And I forgot all about it. And, it was promised a Michael Martin Murphy guitar signed by Michael Murphy. And, I forgot all about it. I moved to Kerrville and was in my office one day when a guy named Bill Dante, and I don't know if you've ever interviewed Bill, but you should, because he's great. Bill runs he's the chairman of the board for the Texas Rangers Foundation, the former Texas Ranger Foundation over in Fredericksburg. He's a former weatherman for the San Antonio weather, stations over there. And he was in my office. He now runs a magazine called the Texan Magazine, he and his wife, Lisa. And they're absolutely spectacular. It's a great magazine, by the way. It goes to a lot of, really the people I want to reach with my clientele at the Museum of Western Art. And this was this was hung on the wall. And he said, he was looking at all my, my stuff, the degrees and all that crap. And he, Murph? And I said, well, yeah, I know Murph. And I told him that story that I said, and by the way, that sucker owes me a guitar. And he said, well, why didn't he ever get it to you? And I said, well, his manager who had promised me one of the guitars, Bert Madera, passed away right before COVID, right as COVID was starting, and just never told Michael about it. So here I was thinking I was going to get guitar, but Bert had not communicated to Michael. And Bill said, Michael's a friend of mine. I'm going to make it happen. And I said, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. And a year went by, and Bill came back into my office. He saw the picture again. And he said, oh, man, I was going to talk to Michael about getting you a guitar. He's doing a concert for us over a fundraiser over in New Braunfels. Why don't you come by? And, I said, well, I'd love to do it. And then I ended up getting COVID. And I couldn't go over to the concert. And so Michael was going to come to Kerrville and do a benefit concert. And we were all going to sit down and have dinner together. Bill Dante and his wife, me and my wife. And Michael ended up getting sick. I don't know if it was COVID, but he had the flu or something. And so we had to cancel. 2 weeks later, when they had rescheduled it, I was out of town. I had to be in Dallas that weekend, so I couldn't make it. The following Monday, Bill Dante walks into my office with a case that he said, I've got something for you. And he said, Michael remembered that he owed me a guitar. And one of the reasons we were going to get together was so he could give me my own version of the Michael Martin Murphy autographed guitar with the lyrics to Wildfire written on it. Let's see if I can reach around here and get that.
So for those of you listening, what Darrell has literally is a Michael Martin signed guitar with the lyrics to Wildfire written around the side of it.
Yeah, this is a Yamaha 335 guitar. It's made out of wood and plastic and a little metal, and it's of the modern era, if you will. And as a museum person, I've always got to say that that's what it's made of. Just a pretty standard guitar. But what's really cool about it, it's got the words Wildfire written right in the center, signed by Michael Martin Murphey. It's got this 3M logo, and then over here on the I think it's the left side or somewhere, it starts off with the lyrics. She comes down from Yellow Mountain on a dark, flat, land she rides on a pony she named Wildfire with a whirlwind by her side. And it goes on and does there's a hoot owl howling outside my window and all the great, the great lyrics. And he does these around, the around the edge of the guitar. What's fascinating to me is that I've been doing this with him for 20 something years now, or been a part of him, watching him auction off the guitars. And honestly, his handwriting has gotten worse and worse and worse. when I first one I ever saw, it was very clear and distinct, and you could read all of the words. And this one came through the door, and you can tell he's writing it out, and his penmanship's not as good. But Bill Dante came in the door, and he said, "I've got something for you." And he takes this guitar out, and he said, "Michael, sorry that he missed you." Because that was one of the things he wanted to do was give me the guitar. And I don't know if Michael actually said it, but Michael said, "This ought to shut him up." So it's a special little memento of a relationship, of kind of a secondary relationship with a famous person. And so I always thought that was pretty cool. So we've had it out on display at the museum, and people seem to really enjoy it. I treasure it because it is really pretty something special.
Let me ask you, what did either the song Wildfire or the album Blue Sky Night Thunder mean to you when you were a senior in high school? Because I was a freshman in college.
We had great music, right? I mean, my generation has screwed up a lot of things, but we got the music right, and guys like Michael Murphy, John Denver, the Eagles, that era, Chicago bred. I mean, the whole group, they knew how to do music. Music meant something. It wasn't just a bunch of, 3 words repeated over and over with head banging music, right? I mean, it was lyrical. It was mystical. And, and Michael's got a, tremendous voice. He still does. And he's a tremendous guitar player. And he spoke to an entire generation of, a storyteller. And I was in the Western genre, if you will, as an art major, and was hoping one day to go into the museum world in the Western art field. And he was of that Western genre. A lot of people don't realize that some of these greats, you think about George Strait and all those guys, their albums, they don't have just one hit song on them. There's 10 songs and there's 9 hit songs on them. Right. I mean, the albums are packed. Today, I think, a lot of these artists are putting out albums, and they're lucky if they get, average a half a hit song out of every album. And he had, he had 10 hit songs, on Blue Sky Night Thunder. There's Carolina in the Pines. I mean, think about that. That's one of those great Medicine Man and Night Thunder, Rings of Life are all classic, and for me, it was the Western genre. It was the white man honoring the Native American, and he, that's what he sang about.
So what, can you say a few words about, no, actually you can't say a few words about anything, but could you say a little bit about the cowboy songwriter, the cowboy singer, and what that meant in the West?
Yeah. I mean, everything we're doing is storytelling. Right. I mean, the Museum of Western Art in Kerrville, it's all we do is storytell. Right. And for me, the cowboy poets, guys like Baxter Black, and they tell stories. And so their lyrics, in Michael's case, they're little mini movies, if you will. They're little mini dramas. The one that immediately comes to mind is Willie Nelson's Shotgun Willie, or Red-Headed Strangers, even a better example. They made an entire movie about the album Redheaded Stranger, right? I mean, it's one story, one song leads to another, right? And it pieces together a narrative that, tells the story of the American West. The American West, for the most part, um, is not a long period of time. I mean, it is and it isn't. It dates back centuries with Native Americans. But we think about the trail drives; they lasted 3 years, and yet they become a permanent part of you know of our society, right? The stagecoach. There probably wasn't 250 stagecoach runs across the country in the entire existence of the stagecoach, and yet it's a major part of what we think about when we talk about the American West. The shootout at the OK Corral lasted 9 seconds, and yet it's lasted for 150 years, right? I mean, so the American West is all about telling stories, and that's what Michael does, and Willie and George Strait and all those guys through their lyrics.
Let me change the focus a little bit because wanted to visit with you about the current exhibit at the museum. It's nearing its end, but when I saw it, I think in November or December for the first time, I was really awestruck, and it seemed to me to be the most personal exhibit, and it turned out it was. Can you explain what the exhibit was and why it was so personal?
Yeah, so much of what we do, we plan so far in advance. We have to have things really worked out. Um, we're planning, for example, a Billy Shank exhibition that starts in July, and we've been working on it for 3 years. Right? We know every work that's going to be in it and where they're going to hang, and I mean all that. We've got the 40th anniversary show that's coming up in April, and we've been planning it for 2 years. Right? That particular show, the one that's currently up, we call it Works We Love, and I quite honestly had dropped the ball and not really put together much thought into what we were going to have from between November and April, because I was so concentrating on the 40th anniversary that's coming up in April. I was concentrating on Billy Shank. I was concentrating on the 40th Roundup in the fall. We're even doing something with Schreiner University to celebrate their 100th this year. I'm working 2 and 3 years in advance, and quite honestly, the November 22 to April 23 time slot kind of just escaped me. I hadn't given it much thought. I knew we were going to put up permanent works from our permanent collection, but I hadn't thought about what. And then one day it hit me: why don't we let the people choose? Why don't we let our docents, our volunteers, our guests, come in and we say to them, what's your favorite work in this exhibit, in our collection, and invite them back to the vault and let them go through the works and say, God, I'd love to see that up. And in some cases, works that we had not given a second thought to in years, right? Because we've got, 1,000 works that we're dealing with. And sometimes things get kind of pushed aside and we don't put them out. And I pulled this little, one of our docents said, God, I just absolutely love this little piece here. Look at this. It took it out under light. I just went, where has that been? Incredible. And we put it out, and sure enough, it's been a big hit. So we call it Works We Love. And it was very personal because you could tell there's been a lot of people who they have a reason for that work to be out. It doesn't make a lot of sense, honestly, as far as thematic approach goes. We do have one room that's all cows. We said we were able to do that. And we were able to pull, several people pulled Fred Harmon's works out, his works they loved. And that got us to thinking, Fred Harmon, gosh, we've got a lot of Fred Harmon works. Why do we have a lot of Fred Harmon's works? Well, he was a founder of the CA, Cowboy Artist of America. And we were gifted years ago a great collection of his works. But then we got to thinking, you know what? In the archives, we've got cartoons. We've got some of his cartoon strips. We've got original cells. Let's pull all of those together. So we created Fred Harmon and, Red Ryder and Little Beaver and put those in a separate room. And so it just kind of evolved into, what do they say? Even a blind squirrel can find an acorn every once in a while. And we were fortunate enough to find a really good acorn in that mess of things. So yeah, kind of personal, but hadn't thought about it in that way, but yeah.
That's really what I felt. And I felt like there was a docent next to me explaining why this was one of their favorite pieces in the
And
Fred
I tell you what, you can go, I selected that and they put it on the wall, you know.
the Fred Harmon room was my childhood.
Oh yeah.
So I got to sort of see that and things I hadn't seen in years. So it was incredibly personal, and just remember thinking this feels very different.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun putting it together. Once we settled on that idea, and we started inviting people back to the vault, find their works. They got excited, right? You know, where's that? And they would, it was the funniest thing. They would say, "Now, I don't know the title of it, and I don't know who painted it, but well, how am I going to find it if you don't know the title?" And then they start describing it. It's a man on a white horse, and he's got his hand up, and and he's looking, kind of out. It's called "Looking for the Wagon Train," by Joe Beeler. And we pull it. Is this the one? Yep, that's it. That's the one. I love that painting. It hadn't been out for years. Well, we've got a study that goes with it, so let's pull the study and put it out there. And some of the ones they pulled, they we have out a lot, right? I mean, some of the favorites are the favorites because they're so great. Buck McCain's The Invocation, and Roy Anderson's In the Rainbow Teepee, and Robert Pummel's piece called A Ways to Go. Those are people's favorites for a reason. It's because they're absolutely great. But we were able to pull some things that hadn't been out in years because people, it was there, kind of spoke to them for a reason. And the didactic information that we put up, we'd ask them, why is this your favorite? And the comments, that are there, we put the little cards beside it. This was chosen by, our docent Judy Ward, or, and, well, I like this because, this speaks to me at a level. They remember it. They have a story about it. That scene is a scene from their history. And so it made it very personal.
And could you just tease us a little bit with the next exhibit?
Yeah, I mean, talk about a great exhibit. My goodness. We're putting together a show called 40 Years of Western Art. And it is representative of the last 40 years. Museum of Western Art opened in 1983. So this is our 40th anniversary. And I put together a list of, I started writing one day the list of people I was influenced by, the impactors, if you will, those artists that we needed to have at a show to say, these are the impact people of the last 40 years. Excuse me. And they all include people like Robert Pummel, who's a Kerrville area artist. They include Roy Anderson. And I mean, you could go through the list. And then I got to thinking, but Andy Thomas in Missouri was impactful in the Western art movement. Of course, it's got to include Howard Turpning and Ron Riddick. And I started making this list. And when I got through, it was 200 names. I can't put 200 works up, right? So I have to kind of start getting a little more critical. Okay, so what made them impactful? It made me think through the whole process of the people that I think are the impact people of the last 40 years. And I got the list down to about 85 names. And we have invited those 85 people, if they're living, to get us a painting or a sculpture that represents them. That when somebody walks up, they go, my God, that's a Ron Riddick. That's a Jack Sorensen, or that's a T.D. Kelsey. I want people to walk up, and if they know the Western art world, they'll walk up and go, wow, that's a Howard Turpin. And so I started calling around. Obviously, those who have passed, we either had to borrow from collectors or we have them in our collection. And this show is about 50-50. Works from our permanent collection and works that we have borrowed from other museums, collectors, or gotten them directly from the artist. So if they were dead, I borrowed them from a collector or a museum. And if they were living, I reached out to them and I said, I need to borrow a work. Now, they could go out to a collector and find it, or they could reach out to the museum and help me find it. Or they could say, in like a couple of cases, I'll just send you one, right? I've got one in my personal collection that I think represents me really well. So we're going to have some works that have never been seen before. Howard Turpning, for example, is probably the most famous of all of they consider him the dean of the Western art movement. And Howard's works will sell for $1 million. He was one of the first. That's why he's in this show, is because he's an impact player, right? He was one of the first guys to break that barrier. Western art has not always been in the same genre as fine art, if you will. They don't, a lot of the critics have never included the Charlie Russells and Frederick Remingtons in the Western art genre. Howard was one of the first people to say, listen, this is serious art. And we know it because people are willing to pay $1 million for it. So I started calling around to collectors I knew who had Howard Turpnings and museums, and nobody would lend me one, right? Because honestly, they don't want it to be on the road. They don't want it to be in going down the highway at 80 miles an hour, right? I mean, even though we've got it highly insured and we're using the best couriers in the country, everybody was saying, no, I can't do that. So I picked up the phone and called Howard and I said, I've got a problem. And he said, just the one? I said, well, right at the moment. And I told him, I said, nobody's willing to lend to me a Howard Turpney painting. He said, well, I'll loan you one. And we made arrangements to get it here. And it's a piece called He's My Horse Now. And it's never been seen. It's in his personal collection. And it's a smaller piece, small-ish piece compared to some of the great big ones. But it's going to be a collection of 85 works of the best of the best. Now, did I get it completely right? I'm going to tell you right now, I did not. Right? I've left people out, and I promise you I'm going to get my hands slapped. There are people going to walk up and say, well, how come such and such is not in this show? And the only thing I could think of was, you remember Casey Kasem?
You bet.
The radio disc jockey.
America's Top 40.
Yeah, somebody said, how do you select the best of a given year? And he said, it's my radio station, right? My ball, my bat, right? And so for this show, I'm going to take the credit or I'm going to take the blame, and there's going to be some blame. There's going to be some people. When people get to thinking like I did, they're going to say, well, how come Morris Ripple's not in this show? And I'm going to say, well, he deserves to be in this show, but I could not find a single person who would lend me one, right? Or B, the works I could find, I didn't think represented him well enough.
Can I suggest a response to that?
So, yeah.
Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it.
We're going to do a podcast. We'll start a podcast thanks to you guys here on the Hill Country, podcast. We are network. We're going to do a called It's Art. Let's talk about it. Let's have that conversation. And it's great. So we're excited about it. 85 works, and like I say, 50-50 deceased people versus living, and 50-50 from our permanent collection and borrowed from others. But man, Jerry Jordan, I mean, people just don't get to see his work, and we've got a fabulous one coming from a local collector. Robert Pummel, Howard Turpning, Ron Riddick, Clark Hewlings. Clark Hewlings is probably one of the all-time greats, greats, one of the superstars. And we don't own one in our personal collection. So I pick up the phone and I called his daughter, and she said, sadly, Darrell, I don't even own one. Right? I mean, they're that rare to see. But she said, let me call a couple of collectors, and a collector from Tulsa, Oklahoma called me, and we're going up in a couple of weeks, and we're going to take a transport, truck up there, and we're going to get this painting and bring it back. It's going to be a rare chance to see 85 of the greats in one location.
Darrell, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but before we leave, if our listeners wanted more information on the Museum of Western Art, where can they go?
Really quick, museumofwesternart.com. Museumofwesternart.com. And our website is brand new. Can't say enough good things about it. It looks fabulous. There's pictures and schedules and contact information and everything about what you need to know, how to get there, ticket prices, when the show's open, all out there. We're already planned our page. We're going to start teasing our podcast next week. So,
right.
Yeah, we're going to start telling people about the podcast, and we'll be able to start promoting that. But yeah, Museum of Western Art, and come see us at 1550 Bandera Highway, Kerrville, Texas.
Darrell, thanks so much, and I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Always a pleasure. Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it.
This is Tom Fox again. Thanks so much for listening to the award-winning Hill Country Podcast. I hope you'll join us again for another episode. The Hill Country Podcast is a production of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network.